Hotshot AI Startups. Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. So we're going to be taking the pulse of the startup scene, AI startups that use existing large language models. So an important ingredient, if you're creating one of these, you don't want to just write a user interface slapped on top of a large language model that you subscribe to. Not a lot of differentiation there. So some of the larger LLMs you can subscribe to: OpenAI with GPT-4, Google Gemini, Microsoft Azure, Amazon, and a bunch of others. So they all offer subscription services. Simply writing a user interface on top of an existing LLM is not going to, it's not going to do anything. It's too easy to do that, and there's no differentiation. So any startup can subscribe to any of the large language model vendors, right? And so it's very difficult to differentiate yourself. So how can you differentiate if you're creating an AI startup using one of the large LLMs? Okay, there's a bunch of options. This is just a few of the options. Option one, a proprietary API. An API is an application programming interface. So your product or service offers to other programmers an application programming interface they can use to hook up to your product or service. So they would integrate what you offer into their product or service. Option two, you can have proprietary analytics applied to the data coming from the large language model. So instead of a UI skin on top of an LLM, you have custom analytics. It could be real estate analytics, for example. Let's say you're writing an AI product or service that analyzes the current availability of office space throughout the world. You could prompt LLMs and then perform analysis on the data you get based on the particular user using your application, as an example. Custom analytics, proprietary analytics, obviously it would have to be something unique. Option three, workflow handling. So you'd prompt the LLM, and then it would be part of a workflow, for example, for, say, a manufacturing workflow or a sales workflow, where the data from the LLM is tailored to the particular customer you're working with in sales, but there's custom workflow handling, not just the LLM data, right? Option four, this became popular with search engines, aggregating a bunch of LLM vendors. So instead of prompting just one LLM, you have subscriptions to all of them. And any user of your product or service doesn't know it, but you're actually prompting all the LLMs you subscribe to, and then you're performing something unique and proprietary based on all the prompts, all the results you get back from the large language models that you subscribe to. Option five, this is not so easy to pull off. In-house proprietary large language model. You definitely need funding for that. That can be run into the millions for training, for setting up that system, for maintaining it. That could be a very expensive undertaking. However, the cool thing about this option is you own the large language model. There's no way anybody else can share it because it's in-house, right? So proprietary API, unique proprietary analytics, unique workflow handling, aggregation of a bunch of LLMs, or an in-house LLM. Just some ideas. That's obviously not all the ideas, but it's much better than just a skin on a large language model. This is a big problem. There are a lot of startups who don't see who don't understand that this is not, it's not practical in terms of being able to differentiate. So let's talk about the current status of AI startups. There's a 90% failure rate. So that might seem shocking, but that's generally true for startups. There's a high failure rate. A lot of different reasons, a lot of different causes. The big one is no differentiation. As far as AI startups go, no differentiation, because you can't just subscribe to a large language model and make a startup out of that. You've got to have something unique, proprietary, that your startup does, and maybe it's something that is hard to copy, or you're first to the market and you go big and you take most of the market before somebody else can start competing with you. Another problem, another reason for failure is uncurated data. You prompt an LLM, you get data. Is it always accurate? No. There's hallucinations from large language models. If you don't curate the data you get back, that can lead to problems because your customers will wonder, can I rely on this? It's got some issues. If it's not reliable, maybe there's a better option out there. So another reason for failures, no product to market fit. So if you're solving an actual legitimate problem in the marketplace, you can get product market fit. If you've identified a problem, and I'll give you an example here in a couple seconds, a legitimate problem that a lot of people have, and you've come up with a way to solve it, that can give you product market fit and avoid this high failure rate. So successful AI startups, they solve a legitimate problem. They add value that exceeds the results of prompting an LLM, right? They're obviously, most startups are relying on existing large language models provided by these vendors, right? But the successful startups are adding value that exceeds the result of prompting the large language model. Another way to make a successful startup is have a human in the loop. So an example of that could be a medical AI startup that requires a licensed practitioner, a doctor or a dentist or a surgeon, an optometrist, an ophthalmologist, and so on, someone with a license to be involved. So instead of just relying on a large language model, there's a human required to provide the full value to your customer. So there are some ideas on how to make a successful AI startup. So here's an example of a legitimate problem. So a lot of people are becoming aware of the fact that all of a sudden, a lot of service providers are charging exorbitant rates. Electricians, plumbers, dentists, doctors, roofing companies, HVAC businesses, software as a service companies, all of a sudden, they've got it in their head that they're providing so much value, they can fleece you. They can drain your bank account. So part of the cause of that is private equity buying up these businesses. Private equity has been buying up electricians, plumbers, dentists, doctors, roofing companies, SaaS companies, HVAC businesses, and so on. And people are starting to figure out that if they've been using like a roofing company or an electrician, and then all of a sudden the electrician triples their rate, and they find out, okay, they were bought out by a private equity firm, and that's why they're charging. So one possible way to solve a legitimate problem is to allow any consumer anywhere on the planet identify service providers that have not been acquired by private equity. That's just an example. In other words, the value you would add is you would allow people to avoid being fleeced by service providers who have been acquired by private equity. Because private equity, they really don't care so much about the customer. They care about charging the most for each customer they possibly can. And they're not being very intelligent about it because there's a lot of resentment among consumers about this problem. Private equity buying up all these service providers that used to be relatively affordable no longer are affordable. They're charging too much, and they think they have you over a barrel. So if there was an AI-based startup that provided a way for consumers to avoid private equity-owned service providers, that could be a way to solve a legitimate problem. Just an idea. So the main takeaway, though, is that any startup can subscribe to any of the big large language model vendors, right? Anyone can be a subscriber, and you have to figure out a way to, number one, solve a legitimate problem, and number two, add value that exceeds the results of just prompting the large language model. So, one way is human in the loop, but there are other ways. But the one thing you want to avoid is putting a user interface skin on top of prompting a large language model and nothing else. That's not going to succeed. In order to get funding, I'll just tell you, if you're interested in being funded, I'll tell you what you really need. Let's say that you have a network of 100 highly placed people who are in a position to be able to fund your startup if you have a good idea. In other words, you went gangbusters and you have a great network. Okay, so if you present an idea, but you can't demonstrate that you've solved a legitimate problem, even though those people, you've got 100 friends in high places, they may not help you get your startup going. You have to prove you've solved a legitimate problem. How do you do that? Revenue. So if you have an AI startup idea, the first order of business should be to get revenue, to get paying customers. 1 customer, 2 customers, 10 customers. If you approach your 100 highly placed friends in your network and say, I have $50,000 a month in recurring revenue, 50,000 recurring revenue per month with my AI startup, you will get funded. Okay. If you ask them, I have this idea, I'm thinking about starting, will you give me funding? They're probably going to say you need to have revenue. So that's the way you can tell that having a network is much less important than solving a legitimate problem and getting customers, getting revenue, right? So don't worry so much if you don't have a network. The more important thing is to, with an AI startup, is to be solving a legitimate problem and not simply be a user interface skin on the top of a large language model vendor, right? So if you have any questions about this, I thought this would be interesting because there have been a lot of AI startups that have been doing well, and a bunch of them, 90%, that have not been doing well. And some of the reasons why, it's pretty obvious if you look into it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions you post in the comments. And I really want to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.